everyone, and whoever is watching this presentation. Um, this is essentially a review of some of the information that we cover through the course EDUC 5420, Assessments and Implications. So we'll talk about some of the strategies that were incorporated, some of the information that we covered, and how it was applied, and we'll end with a reflection on this information. So the first series of strategies that were discussed were learning intentions and success criteria. So a learning intention is identifying a specific skill that students are going to acquire through the application of a lesson, also through its associated activities. The success criteria is what measures that level of comprehension of the skill that we're trying to acquire. So when this strategy was applied, it was applied to the standard of 628A3C, which was determining the foundational concepts and principles of Athenian democracy and the Roman Republic that later influenced the development of the United States Constitution. We elicited evidence through a rubric that was applied to a presentation which the students were constructing throughout the entire lesson. Students acquired a skill of being able to identify similar concepts and principles within the government of specific societies and how they related to modern day democracy. In the end, the students had gained the ability to recognize similarities in the various forms of government that are present today among the world's many nations, as well as those of the past. The second series of strategies that we discussed were eliciting evidence of learning. So this incorporated things like increased wait time, enabling thinking and elaboration time, making of statements with class questions and student questions, also all student questions through the administration of exit tickets. These strategies were applied to the standard of 628A4A, which was analyzing the role of religion and other means rulers used to unify and centrally govern expanding territories with diverse populations. So evidence of this strategy was elicited by students being given a group activity in the form of a jigsaw activity, and it aimed to engage students in small group discussion. So students established a foundational knowledge of the religion of Islam. They analyzed the role of religion in establishing a form of government in the Arabian territories, and also how this was particularly used, Islam, to manage population. In the end, students were able to interpret Quran, the 5 pillars of Islam, the Sunnah, and the Sharia, and also reflect understandings of the workings of Islam in non-secular societies as a means of unification in territories with diverse populations. The next series of strategies that we discussed were activating students as their own knowledge, owners of their own knowledge. This incorporated strategies such as self-regulated learning, self-reports, as well as intrinsic and extrinsic motivators, and we will elaborate a little bit more on those intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. But this was applied to the standard 628C4E, which is determining the extent to which interaction between the Islamic world and medieval Europe increased trade, enhanced technology innovation, and impacted scientific thought and the arts. Evidence for this was elicited through a group learning activity which engaged students in independent research, as well as self-assessment at both midway and the conclusion of the lesson. When we applied this, students established a foundation of knowledge of Islamic cultural achievements. They analyzed the role of Islamic cultures that they've played in the advancement of fields such as geography, astronomy, mathematics, science. And in the end, students were able to identify some of the major achievements made by the Islamic empires. They analyzed the benefit that they had on modern civilizations today, and also they compared and contrast some of their applications in modern society. Next, we discussed providing feedback that moves learning forward. This incorporated reactions of students, growth mindset, and also feedback as part of a system. This was applied to the standard 6 to 8B4D, which was explain why the Arabian Peninsula's physical features and location made it the epicenter of Afro-Eurasian trade and fostered the spread of Islam in Africa, Europe, and Asia. We elicited evidence through the completion of a map activity in which students were asked to locate and identify major Islamic empires as well as the Byzantine Empire. When we applied this, students were to develop a comprehension of how Islam grew quickly in strength and size into a world power due to trade, religion, and conquest. They also connected this knowledge to previous lessons of the Roman Empire, and they analyzed the conquest of Constantinople and the fall of the Byzantine Empire from the side of the Islam. In the end, students were able to explain how the location of the Arabian Peninsula played a key role in the outcome of this conflict between the Byzantine Empire and the Ottoman Empire, and during their quest for control over the Mediterranean and Constantinople. And student reaction to feedback is analyzed and compared to subsequent feedback analysis for signs of increased effort as well as aspiration. Next, we reviewed an article a little bit that delved a little bit deeper into learning resources, students working as learning resources for one another. And there is essentially a plethora of evidence that supports the benefit of students being able to learn from peers. Peers often have a way of explaining and clarifying elements of a lesson that might seem a little confusing as they're coming from the teacher. There were 5 conditions that the author noted that are to be met in order to increase student achievement through this strategy. Clearly perceive positive interdependence, face-to-face interaction, individual accountability, interpersonal and small groups, and a group processing of current functioning. So clearly perceived positive interdependence, this refers to students feeling that they are all on the same boat, or essentially all accountable for their part. Face-to-face interaction, students are sharing resources as well as their own interpretations. Also, individual accountability. Each student must be accountable for their own performance and contributions. Interpersonal and small group skills. This is relying on students' abilities to develop trust within the group, communicate effectively, and support each other within the group. Group processing of current functioning, affording students frequent opportunities to reflect on their findings. Activating students as learning resources for one another. So there was a lot of information on this. Some of the strategies that we incorporated with this were cooperative learning, peer feedback, and individual accountability. This was applied to standard 628A4A, which is analyzing the role of religion and other means of rules used to unify and centrally govern expanding territories with diverse populations. Evidence for this was elicited through a group activity in the form of a jigsaw activity, which aimed to engage students in a cooperative learning setting, and students were able to engage in peer feedback while still being held accountable for their own responses. Students established a foundational knowledge of the religion of Islam. Students analyzed the role of religion in establishing a form of government in Arabian territories and how it was used to manage population. In the end, students were able to interpret the Quran, 5 pillars of Islam, Sunnah, and the Sharia, and reflect on the understanding of the workings of Islam in non-secular society, and a means of unification in new territories with diverse populations. We also elaborated a little bit more on a key element or elements that we found specifically interesting on this, and I chose to talk a little bit more on the nurturing of intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. And the main purpose for my choosing, the main reason for my choosing of intrinsic and extrinsic motivators was I wanted to address the main difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. And I feel it's far more important to nurture intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic. There are too many educators nowadays that are baiting students with prizes and candy, special treatments for accomplishing tasks. And the problem is that life simply doesn't reward us every accomplishment of ours. Um, when we accomplish a task, there's just simply not a reward every time, and it ends up making students want to jump through hoops to gain a prize. And if there is no prize, they're not going to do the activity. They need to be intrinsically motivated. So we can do this by weighing their performance against past performance. We don't want students to weigh their performance against each other, because they might just be the student that's never going to be the top performer. And if they're constantly reminded of that, then this makes them feel like they're set up for failure. They need to be motivated by feelings of pride, accomplishment, and achievement. And this starts by educators knowing each of their students on an individual level. They need to decode their students' strengths, their weaknesses, patterns of success and failure, and identify what truly drives them. They need to be encouraged to think, pair, share within groups. Analyze and interpret this peer information, but for the purposes of incorporation into their own findings. We need to encourage the increased ownership of their learning through means such as self-assessment. Provide encouraging and personalized feedback. Teachers' feedback validates students' accomplishments. So although the student might feel accomplished, it's the teacher who validates that and allows the student to move forward knowing that they did truly accomplish what they set out to do. Students can self-report retrospectively on their responses via a self-assessment student survey. These tools will help students form habits of weighing their performance against their past performance. So in reflection, modifying lesson plans, materials, and activities is easy to do just by applying one or more of these strategies to standards that are already applicable in the lesson that you wish to give. Strategies can be applied to subsequent lessons, and new strategies can be applied on top of that. The biggest area for improvement I saw in this course was through assessment. One of my favorite strategies was learning intention and establishing success criteria. Keeping the learning intention transparent throughout a lesson helps students. Students know what they are intending on learning. They should always know what they're supposed to be learning throughout the lesson. Combine this with a well-established success criteria. Students know what they need to measure themselves. So students know how to measure themselves, how to measure whether or not they are having success. Students, therefore, shouldn't be surprised surprised by the means at which the teacher is going to assess them. This improved my ability to reinvent lessons which I've already created. So it's not necessarily having to create something from scratch, but being able to take material, lessons, assessments, activities that I've already created and apply these new strategies to reinvent things that I've already created. This keeps lessons fresh, and it provides new, fresh feedback. Strategies are very easy to explain to colleagues. It's easy to reinvent lessons previously created just by applying these new strategies. Student feedback was all that was needed to really see a difference. And in the end, I truly left with something of good use, which I can apply in my classroom. And I can't necessarily say that about all of the classes that I've taken. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Take care.